What shall be a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free?
In the 4 years since, Gorman has become an advocate, speaking out against racial inequality and the banning of books. She is out with a new book, Girls on the Rise, where she speaks to young women about empowerment, inclusivity, and facing their fears. I sat down with Amanda Gorman for a Meet the Moment conversation where we discussed her journey and how poetry can speak to all Americans. Amanda Gorman, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It is an honor to have you here. What do you hope young girls, young boys, young people take away from the message in this new book?
I'm so excited about this children's book because for me, it originated around this idea of having a children's book that underscores the importance of community and allyship. So often in children's books, we follow an individual character, which I love. I live for that. But I was kind of like, what if we turn that on its head a little bit? And the book is about the village. It's about the wave. It's about the movement. It's about what it means to be a young person in a generation that is going to and is currently changing the world. And that's what I hope is the heartbeat of the book.
Why was it important for you to celebrate young women and young girls in this moment?
I love that question because this book has been in the works for several years. I kind of came into being a few years ago when Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I, like so many other people, was just watching that testimony enwrapped. And I think especially as a woman, I really connected with that sensation of being the person in the room speaking her truth and not being heard. And I wrote that poem that night. And then as the years went on, I started thinking to myself, this could also be a message that I think particularly young girls and their allies need to hear now more than ever.
You have used your art and your poetry for activism. You've spoken out about racial inequality, climate change. You've spoken out about book banning, particularly after your poem that you delivered at the 2021 inauguration was banned in a Florida school. What was your reaction when you learned that your poem had been banned?
To be honest, it was a bit like a gut punch. It felt surreal. I had understood that book bans have been happening, but I think this hit me so incredibly hard because not just that it was something I had written, which is besides the point, that it was a moment in history, that if a child at the school wanted to hear words that were spoken on a presidential inauguration for their country, it had kind of been softly restricted in that way. But I think as I started to kind of open my eyes to the broader environment of what's happening now, there are so many book bans happening right now that are very terrifying if you pay attention to what that means for our children's right to read and learn and what it means for teachers and libraries. There's been reports of over 10,000 book bans just in the school year alone. That's an over 200% increase from last school year. And so I would say if anyone cares beyond just my own work being banned, it's so important to be awake to what's happening on a local level.
When did you know you wanted to be a poet? Did you know, or are you just, is it just a part of you? Is it something you've always known?
I think it is a bit a part of me, almost like in my blood. I felt this kind of will of writing. Even when I was like 4 or 5, my mom would have to give me quarters for every morning I stayed in bed instead of getting up at like 6 a.m. and writing because that poor woman would have to get up with me and turn on the lights. And so even then I was writing as if I was a commissioned poet. I didn't know that writing was a job at that point. I didn't know that it was something that I could do, let alone as a girl, let alone as a Black person. But as I grew and saw examples of that, I knew I would give my whole life to just have this as my craft.
Why do you think poetry is so critical to who we are as a nation?
Poetry has consistently been the language of a people. I think it's the reason why when there's protest, you will hear metaphor, you will hear they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds. It's the reason that there's a poem and not a 36-page essay at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. When we are trying as a people to speak to our best shared common humanity, typically poetry is the rhetoric that encapsulates that the best. I think there's something magical about it that is humble, that is hopeful, but that's also wounded enough to remind us of the past that we've stepped from and the future we want to move to.
I'm usually interviewing politicians who don't
Yes.
want to say that they want to run for this office or that office or run for president one day. You have proudly and confidently said that
Yes.
you want to run for president
Absolutely.
in 2036,
Yes.
and you are able to do that. When did you first get that bug? When did you first think, I want to be president of the United States one day?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I was probably 11, sixth
Wow.
grade, very early. I have delusions of grandeur, as you would say. But at that age, I was just starting to become an activist, and I was getting interested in local issues. Particularly, I had a friend whose mother was doing work around sex trafficking, and I was finding out about that. And I was just overwhelmed with the amount of policy that was not in place. And I started thinking to myself, someone has to do something about these issues. Then I kind of looked around and I said, why not me? Why not now? Why not here? And so I think from a young age, it just felt like a responsibility and an opportunity to step up.
And Amanda, poets are a part of the history of this country, from Robert Frost to Maya Angelou.
Yes.
What do you hope your mark will be?
I hope my mark is being a wordsmith and a change maker who speaks in a language that allows our country to return to love, legacy, and connection.
Our thanks to Amanda Gorman for a great conversation. And to see my full interview with Amanda Gorman, go to meetthepress.com. That is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Go Birds. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.